Hey guys, tonight we're heading back in time to a place where the air smells faintly of incense, and the ancient streets are filled with the sound of clinking sandals. But before we dive into the mysteries of Egypt, let's pause. You're about to settle in for a journey where we'll explore how Egyptians, yes, ancient Egyptians, chose their gods based on a cat's mood. And no, you probably won't survive this if you're not ready for some weird, sleepy, but fascinating history. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm really curious to know where you're from, so drop your location and local time in the comments below. Let's see where everyone's tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Egypt, a land filled with gods, pharaohs, hieroglyphs, and, oh yes, cats. It's almost impossible to talk about ancient Egypt without imagining a sleek, elegant feline lounging in a sunbeam, or prowling around the shadows with eyes that seem to see into your very soul. But here's the thing. These cats weren't just household pets. They were much more. They were deeply woven into the fabric of Egyptian religious and cultural life. So much so that the ancient Egyptians might have looked at their cats and thought, this cat's mood today will tell us which god is watching over us. Let's be clear. Cats didn't just roam the streets of Egypt like ordinary animals. They were revered, feared, and treated like royalty. So much so that their moods were considered a form of divine guidance. So, settle in and let me take you on a journey through this strange and sacred bond between Egypt's people and their beloved cats. Now, before we get too deep into the cat worship, let's set the stage. Imagine the sun rising over the Egyptian desert, its golden rays spreading across the bustling streets of Thebes or Memphis, the hustle and bustle of merchants selling their goods, priests chanting prayers, and, of course, the quiet and dignified figure of a cat padding along, eyes gleaming with a mysterious knowledge. As much as cats were part of the background noise, they were also part of something much greater. The Egyptians believed that certain gods could embody the essence of a cat's nature: grace, independence, and unpredictability. They didn't just live in the moment. They were gods who could shift the course of the future based on what a cat felt that day. In this society, you didn't just pick your gods the way you might choose a new pair of sandals or a shiny piece of pottery. No. Gods were chosen based on signs, omens, symbols, and of course, just the behavior of the animals around you. And there was one animal that seemed to carry divine messages: the cat. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's rewind and start with the most important feline figure in ancient Egypt: the goddess Bastet. She wasn't just some casual deity thrown into the mix. She was an essential part of Egyptian religious life. And she had a powerful connection to cats. And as much as she was the goddess of protection, fertility, and home, she also had another side: a destructive, fierce force that could be invoked in times of battle. Historians still argue whether Bastet originally started as a lioness deity before her image evolved into that of a more gentle, domestic cat. Some say she was a fierce lioness, connected to the sun god Ra, and that over time, she became associated with domestic cats, who were seen as protectors of the home. Others insist that the gentle domestic cat was always her true form, reflecting the softer, nurturing side of her nature. Regardless of which side you take, one thing is certain. The Egyptians absolutely adored her. Bastet's role in Egyptian society went far beyond being just a god. She was seen as a protector of both people and animals, but she also had a deep connection with the moods and behaviors of cats. And it wasn't just the grand temples that were devoted to her. Bastet had an important place in everyday life. Cats, sacred to Bastet, were kept in homes to protect families and their food supplies from pests. But if you were particularly lucky or wealthy, you might have even had a cat in the service of the temple, which was seen as a great honor. And there were even communities in Egypt that dedicated themselves entirely to the worship of Bastet and her feline companions. But what made this goddess, this symbol of protection and destruction, so integral to Egyptian spirituality? To answer that, we need to understand how cats themselves were perceived. You see, in ancient Egypt, cats were seen as the embodiment of divine grace. They were independent, mysterious, and highly protective of their homes. But here's the kicker. Their moods were unpredictable. One minute, they could be purring contentedly in a lap. The next, they'd swipe at you with claws sharp enough to make you think twice about getting too close. This fickleness was thought to mirror the gods themselves, protective when they wanted to be, but fiercely destructive if provoked. In a way, these cats weren't just pets. They were messengers. When a cat was calm and relaxed, it was a sign of Bastet's favor. But when a cat turned hostile or unpredictable, the Egyptians might have interpreted it as a warning. Maybe the gods were displeased, or perhaps the protective power of Bastet was withdrawing. This unique relationship between cats and their moods created a direct connection between the people and their divine protectors. It was an unspoken language, and only the most devoted priests and worshippers could truly understand it. And so, as you sit back, relaxed, and perhaps even feel the weight of your own cat curling up next to you, or if you don't have one, just picture it. Remember that in ancient Egypt, cats weren't simply animals. They were quite literally, the divine incarnate. They held power over the gods themselves, and their moods were a reflection of the forces that shaped life and death, protection and destruction. As we continue our journey into the land of cats and gods, let's take a deeper look at the heart of Egyptian mythology. The goddess Bastet. She wasn't just any deity. She was the embodiment of both grace and fierce protection. Picture this: a figure with the head of a lioness or a domestic cat, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly calm. But behind that calm, there was an intense power waiting to be unleashed. Cats, as her earthly representatives, shared that same dichotomy, which made them such potent symbols in Egyptian culture. Now, let's rewind a bit. We've mentioned that Bastet's form and role evolved over time, and that's where the mystery really lies. Historians still argue whether Bastet was always envisioned as a cat goddess or whether she began as the lioness goddess, Sekhmet, and later transformed. Some believe Bastet was initially depicted as a fierce lioness, a symbol of the sun's heat and destruction. The story goes that Bastet's wrathful counterpart, Sekhmet, had a bit of a reputation for being uncontrollable. She was the fierce lioness who would destroy anyone in her path, a force of nature meant to exact divine retribution. But, over time, as Egypt's needs and beliefs evolved, so did the form of Bastet. Perhaps it was due to the changing role of women in Egyptian society, or maybe it was just a cultural shift. But Bastet slowly transitioned from being the fiery lioness to a more serene and nurturing figure. By around 1000 BCE, she was depicted as a gentle, domestic cat, still fierce, of course, but more in control, more subtle. And this shift had a profound impact on Egyptian society's view of both their gods and their animals. Imagine that. One day, you might be praying to the lioness who could burn your enemies to ash, and the next, you're seeking the calm and serene protection of a cat curled up by your side. It was a powerful transition, one that mirrored the changing dynamics in Egyptian religion and culture. And, of course, it was all wrapped up in the idea that cats were the ultimate embodiment of divine balance, capable of both destruction and peace, depending on how they felt in any given moment. Bastet, in her new form as a cat goddess, became the protector of the home. She was the guardian of mothers, children, and fertility. But she wasn't just a nurturing figure. No. She could still bring destruction if the situation demanded it, especially in matters of revenge. In fact, cats, under her protection, could become fierce defenders of those they loved, pouncing with the same fury that Bastet herself might unleash. But despite her destructive side, she was also seen as a goddess of love, music, and joy. It's as if Bastet was reminding her worshippers that life was both fierce and gentle, much like a cat's moods could shift from loving purrs to sharp claws in the blink of an eye. Now, what makes this all even more fascinating is that cats, as loyal followers of Bastet, were believed to carry her divine presence wherever they went. If you had a cat in your home, you were protected by Bastet's power, and if the cat was calm and content, you knew Bastet's blessing was upon you. But if the cat was upset or behaving oddly, you might interpret that as a sign that the goddess was sending a message. Maybe it was a warning, or perhaps a shift in divine favor. Cats didn't just roam the streets, they were constantly acting as intermediaries between the mortal world and the gods. In a way, cats were like divine mood rings, giving humans clues about the state of the universe based on how they behaved. It's a strange and wonderful idea, isn't it? That your day could be affected not just by the weather or your personal feelings, but by the way your cat decided to behave. One moment, Bastet's blessings could be showering you with peace and harmony, and the next, you might have to face the wrath of a goddess who wouldn't hesitate to strike if you or your loved ones were threatened. And this wasn't just something reserved for the elite. Cats were found in nearly every household in ancient Egypt. Their presence was ubiquitous. The common people, as well as royalty, kept cats to protect their homes and their crops from pests. But they also kept them as spiritual companions, seeking Bastet's favor and protection. Cats were so important that, in some cases, they were even mummified and placed in tombs with their owners. This wasn't just a sentimental gesture. It was a way of ensuring that the deceased would be protected on their journey to the afterlife. And who better to accompany you into the next world than the divine embodiment of protection herself? Let's not forget, though, that cats were far more than just symbols of protection. They were also seen as agents of balance. The Egyptians believed in a cosmic order known as Ma'at, which was the principle of truth, justice, and harmony. Bastet, in her feline form, was a vital part of maintaining that balance. When things were out of whack, when chaos reigned or threats emerged, the feline goddess could restore harmony with the swipe of a paw, or with a calming purr that signaled peace had been restored. That's why cats, in their quiet, watchful way, were seen as divine mediators, helping to keep the balance between the mortal world and the gods. The idea of Bastet as both a fierce lioness and a gentle cat was more than just a cultural quirk. It was a reflection of the Egyptians' understanding of the duality of life itself. They saw gods not as distant, unchanging figures, but as beings who could embody different aspects of life and nature. And Bastet, with her feline nature, perfectly symbolized that ever-shifting balance between peace and chaos, protection and destruction. Historians still debate whether this evolution in Bastet's character was part of a larger religious shift in Egypt or simply a reflection of cultural changes. But what we can be certain of is that Bastet, in both her lioness and cat forms, was integral to Egyptian life. She was revered by all, from the common farmer to the pharaoh, and her influence stretched beyond the living. Her power was invoked in homes, in temples, and in the afterlife, where her presence continued to protect the souls of the departed. And as the evening light fades and you slip into your own rest, remember that in ancient Egypt, it wasn't just the gods who had moods. Sometimes, it was the cats. And if you happened to be lucky enough to have one, you were never alone. For the divine powers of Bastet were always close by, watching, listening, and perhaps purring softly in the background. As we continue this fascinating dive into ancient Egyptian culture, let's take a moment to step back and look at how the behavior of cats impacted not just religion, but the very way the Egyptians structured their beliefs and practices. After all, Egypt was a land deeply connected to the natural world, where every stone, every breeze, and every creature had a deeper meaning. And so, it's no surprise that the feline kingdom, with its unpredictable yet captivating nature, became a central influence in the divine hierarchy of Egypt. We've already discussed how Bastet, in her feline form, embodied both protection and destruction. But cats weren't just associated with one specific god. Instead, they played a significant role in how Egyptians viewed and related to many gods, offering a window into the way the ancient Egyptians intertwined the mundane and the divine. One of the most fascinating aspects of Egyptian religion is the concept of the animal connection, the idea that certain animals were sacred representations of divine beings. This was far more than simple symbolism. Animals were believed to carry the very essence of their corresponding gods. Cats were no exception. In fact, they were often seen as intermediaries between humans and the gods, as their moods and behaviors seemed to echo the temperament of the deities themselves. The Egyptians didn't simply choose a god based on their needs or desires. They looked for signs from nature and animals, and cats, with their serene yet volatile natures, were particularly revered for their ability to communicate divine will. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians believed that all animals had direct communication with the gods, or if it was specifically the cats who had this unique connection. Some scholars believe that cats were seen as special because of their mystery and ability to maintain a calm yet watchful demeanor. Cats, much like the gods they represented, could seemingly exist in multiple states at once, protective and loving one minute, aloof and indifferent the next. This dual nature made them the perfect candidates for embodying divine forces. Take the example of the goddess Sekhmet, often depicted as a lioness, who represented war and destruction. Her image was one of raw power, a force to be reckoned with. But what's interesting is that the behavior of domestic cats was also tied to this destructive energy, albeit in a subtler way. Cats could be calm and affectionate, basking in the sun. But if they were threatened, they could instantly turn hostile, their claws and fangs bared. This dynamic behavior mirrored the qualities attributed to Sekhmet, who, as a lioness, was known for her violent wrath, but also for her protective and sometimes maternal instincts. On the flip side, Bastet, in her more tranquil form as a domestic cat, was considered the embodiment of love, fertility, and protection. The Egyptians believed that the cat's mood could provide direct insight into the favor of the gods. If a cat was calm and affectionate, it was a sign that Bastet was pleased and that the family was under her protection. But if a cat was restless, aggressive, or aloof, that could be interpreted as a sign that the goddess was displeased, or that the balance of harmony had been disturbed. It's a fascinating idea, right? That your household pet could be the barometer for divine favor and cosmic balance. This connection between cats and the gods went beyond simple rituals or prayers. It was embedded in daily life. If an Egyptian household had a cat, it wasn't just a companion. It was a living, breathing symbol of divine protection. Cats weren't just passive observers of life. They actively participated in shaping the spiritual atmosphere of the home. Families might even perform small rituals to keep their cats calm and happy, ensuring that their divine protector was in the right mood to keep the family safe. The idea that gods could be influenced by the behavior of animals raises an important point about how the Egyptians viewed the divine. Gods were not seen as distant, untouchable beings. They were ever-present, ever-changing, and in constant communication with the world around them. This connection wasn't always a grand, majestic affair. It could be as subtle as the flick of a cat's tail or the change in its posture. The behavior of an animal, particularly a cat, was seen as a direct reflection of the gods' emotions and intentions. In a society where everything was connected to the will of the gods, even the smallest shifts in behavior were taken seriously. Now, while cats were certainly the most revered of animals, they were by no means the only ones connected to the gods. The Egyptians had a complex system of animal symbolism, with each animal representing different qualities or aspects of the divine. For example, the hawk was associated with Horus, the god of the sky and kingship, and the crocodile was linked to Sobek, the god of the Nile. But what made cats unique was their ability to embody both gentle and fierce traits, much like the gods themselves. Let's take a closer look at this dynamic. Cats were often seen as the keepers of Ma'at, the cosmic order that the Egyptians believed governed all of existence. Ma'at represented truth, balance, and harmony, and it was the responsibility of both the gods and the pharaoh to maintain it. Cats, in their own way, helped to maintain Ma'at by embodying the delicate balance between calmness and aggression. They were the living examples of harmony, able to switch from playful companions to fierce protectors at a moment's notice. This connection between cats and divine order wasn't just a philosophical idea. It had real-world consequences. The behavior of cats was observed carefully, and their actions could influence important decisions. If a cat acted aggressively during a particular ritual, for example, it might be seen as an omen that the ritual needed to be altered. If a cat seemed particularly calm and affectionate, it might be interpreted as a sign that the gods approved and that the ritual would go smoothly. As we step back and think about it, we can begin to understand why the ancient Egyptians held cats in such high esteem. They weren't just pets or symbols of grace. They were divine instruments, helping to maintain cosmic balance and acting as messengers from the gods themselves. Their moods were directly tied to the will of the deities, and their behaviors shaped the spiritual atmosphere of the home, the temple, and even the nation. So, next time you're lounging with a cat, maybe take a moment to reflect. In the world of ancient Egypt, that little fur ball might have been seen as a conduit to divine wisdom, with its every mood carrying cosmic significance. It's a comforting thought, isn't it, that the peaceful purr of a cat might be the universe itself, saying everything is in balance. As we continue weaving through the intricate relationship between cats and the divine in ancient Egypt, let's focus on one of the most significant aspects of Egyptian culture: the concept of protection. Cats weren't just revered for their link to gods like Bastet. They were also symbols of safety, guardianship, and security, particularly when it came to the home and family. The ancient Egyptians believed that cats, in their grace and mystery, were natural protectors of the domestic sphere. They were seen as creatures capable of warding off evil, safeguarding the sacred spaces of the home, and even ensuring good fortune. The presence of a cat in an Egyptian household wasn't just about companionship. It was a spiritual safeguard. Picture this: a bustling home filled with the scents of incense and the sounds of children playing, while a sleek cat lounges lazily in the corner, keeping a watchful eye on everything. Its eyes, sharp and alert, seem to take in everything happening around it. The ancient Egyptians believed that the cat's very presence was enough to protect a household from harm. Historians still argue whether cats were universally considered symbols of protection, or if they were specifically linked to certain regions and temples in Egypt. Some scholars believe that the association between cats and protection was particularly strong in the delta regions of the Nile, where agricultural life was so closely tied to the survival of the family. Cats, after all, were natural hunters, skilled in catching pests that could threaten food supplies. Rats and mice weren't just nuisances. They could ruin entire harvests. So, the Egyptians saw the cat as a guardian, not only of their homes, but also of their livelihoods. But the connection between cats and protection went beyond just keeping pests at bay. Cats were also believed to have the power to protect their owners from spiritual harm. It was widely thought that cats could repel evil spirits and other malevolent forces. This belief wasn't just folklore. It was deeply ingrained in Egyptian religious practices. Cats were seen as divine mediators, able to connect humans to the gods while simultaneously keeping dark forces at a distance. It wasn't just a matter of practical protection either. Cats were considered symbols of divine favor. In fact, when an Egyptian family adopted a cat, it was often viewed as a sign that the gods had blessed the household. If the cat thrived, the family believed they had earned the gods' favor. On the flip side, if something happened to the cat, if it fell ill or acted out of character, it was considered an omen. Perhaps Bastet was angry, or maybe the balance of Maat had been disrupted. Whatever the reason, the cat's health and behavior were closely watched, with its actions providing insights into the divine world. The protection cats provided wasn't just metaphorical. It was also deeply embedded in the rituals and customs of Egyptian society. There were specific ceremonies and rites that involved cats, with the goal of ensuring their protective influence. For example, when a family moved into a new home, it was common to offer a small prayer to Bastet, asking for the protection of their home through the presence of a cat. The cat was believed to bring with it the goddess's favor, ensuring peace safety, and fertility for the family. The cat, in a sense, was the embodiment of Bastet's protection in the physical world. But cats weren't just guardians of the living. They also played a significant role in the Egyptian afterlife, offering protection even in death. When Egyptians mummified their deceased, they sometimes included cats in the tomb, believing that these cats would continue to protect the souls of their owners as they made their way through the afterlife. The act of mummifying a cat wasn't simply about preserving its body. It was about ensuring that the spirit of the cat, and by extension, Bastet's protective influence, would follow the deceased into the next world. Cats were seen as powerful guides, offering protection in the afterlife just as they had in life. This connection between cats, the afterlife, and divine protection is particularly fascinating when you consider how closely tied the Egyptians were to their belief in the soul's journey after death. The Egyptians had a complex understanding of the afterlife, and it was believed that a person's soul would face many trials before reaching the paradise of the Field of Reeds. The gods, particularly Anubis, were often called upon to guide the dead, but so too were other animals, especially cats. They were believed to act as spiritual protectors, ensuring that the deceased would make it safely to their final destination. But let's be real for a second. Not every cat was perfect. Right cats, with their independent and sometimes unpredictable nature, weren't always calm, docile creatures. In fact, they could be downright difficult. And for the Egyptians, this was just as significant as their peaceful moments. You see, cats weren't just protectors. They were also a reflection of the chaotic forces of nature. They were unpredictable, and in their mood swings, they mirrored the fickleness of the gods themselves. This made them even more revered, as the Egyptians believed that true protection came with a price. It wasn't about being safe all the time. It was about finding balance in the midst of chaos. The gods could be kind and loving, but they could also be wrathful and destructive. Cats, with their ever-changing moods, were the perfect embodiment of this dual nature. In some ways, this unpredictability was even seen as a form of divine justice. Cats could offer protection when it was needed, but they also had the power to turn on their owners if they weren't behaving in a way that honored the gods. This created a sense of humility in the Egyptians, reminding them that their protection and safety were never guaranteed. The gods, like the cats, were unpredictable, and their favor had to be earned. So, the next time you find yourself watching a cat stretch lazily in a sunbeam, think about how that small creature might be much more than just a companion. In the ancient world, cats were believed to be the physical manifestation of divine protection, wielding the power to safeguard homes and families from harm, and their moods could change the fate of an entire household. Cats weren't just pets in Egypt. They were divine protectors, guides to the afterlife, and the ultimate symbols of cosmic balance. You might not see it on the surface, but in the world of ancient Egypt, cats were far more powerful than you could ever imagine. As we move forward through the labyrinthine world of ancient Egypt and its spiritual connections to cats, let's dive into one of the most fascinating rituals of all: mummification. Now, you might think that mummification was reserved exclusively for humans of high status, pharaohs, noblemen, and the like. But there's something particularly intriguing about how this sacred process extended to the humble cat. Yes, in ancient Egypt, cats were often mummified too, and not just because they were household pets. Their mummification was tied to deep spiritual significance and a direct connection with the gods, particularly Bastet, who was the very embodiment of feline power. Mummification wasn't just a way to preserve bodies for the afterlife. It was a religious act, an offering to the gods. The Egyptians believed that the body needed to be preserved for the soul to continue its journey in the afterlife. The process was both elaborate and sacred, with every step performed with precision and reverence. And when it came to cats, their mummification was just as detailed as that of any royal or priestly figure. They weren't just embalmed. They were honored as divine beings, as protectors of the home and guardians of the soul. Historians still argue over the precise reasons why cats were mummified. Some suggest that it was a way to honor Bastet, ensuring her protection for the deceased. Others speculate that the practice had a more practical side to it, that the mummification of cats was a way to ensure that they could continue to fulfill their protective role in the afterlife. After all, if cats were believed to be guardians of the home and protectors of their owners, it stands to reason that they would be needed to continue this task in the next life. The process of cat mummification was elaborate and often included all the same rituals performed on humans. First, the body would be carefully treated with oils and resins to preserve it. The internal organs would be removed, and the body would be dried out using natron, a mixture of salts that drew out moisture. Then, the body would be wrapped in linen bandages, sometimes with amulets placed within the folds to protect the soul from harm. The cat's eyes were sometimes painted on the wrappings, symbolizing the gaze of the goddess Bastet herself. But what makes the mummification of cats especially fascinating is that it wasn't just a practice for the wealthy or the elite. In fact, the mummification of cats became so widespread in Egypt that it became an industry unto itself. Some estimates suggest that as many as hundreds of thousands of cats were mummified over the centuries. In certain cities, particularly in Bubastis, which was the center of Bastet worship, there were vast cemeteries filled with the mummified remains of cats. These sacred sites were often visited by pilgrims who came to pray and pay homage to the goddess, offering up their own cats in the hope of securing divine protection. Now, imagine a scene in ancient Egypt, a bustling marketplace filled with the scent of spices and the sounds of merchants haggling, while in the distance, a massive temple dedicated to Bastet rises above the city. Inside the temple, hundreds of cats are being mummified, wrapped in linen and carefully prepared for their journey into the afterlife. It was a scene of ritual and reverence, with each cat believed to be an embodiment of Bastet's divine favor. The people didn't just see them as animals, they saw them as vessels for the goddess herself. This sacred relationship between cats and mummification also extended to their role in the afterlife. Cats were believed to guide the souls of the deceased on their journey through the underworld, ensuring they reached their final resting place with the protection of Bastet. Cats, like the gods, were seen as spiritual guides, able to navigate the dangerous journey to the afterlife and offer divine protection along the way. But mummified cats weren't just placed in tombs to accompany the dead. They were also used as offerings to Bastet, who was believed to protect the souls of the deceased. Sometimes, large quantities of mummified cats were found in the tombs of the wealthy, arranged alongside the remains of their human companions. These cats weren't simply pets. They were sacred beings, offering protection and favor to those who had passed on. The act of mummifying a cat was itself an offering to the goddess, a way of ensuring that the soul of the deceased would be safe and guided through the afterlife. It's also worth noting that the mummification of cats wasn't a practice limited to Egypt. Other ancient cultures, such as the Greeks and Romans, were aware of Egypt's deep connection with cats and often adopted certain Egyptian practices. The reverence for cats spread throughout the ancient world, and in some places, like Rome, cats were even kept as symbols of good luck. But Egypt was where the practice of mummifying cats reached its peak, intertwining with the culture's spiritual beliefs in a way that no other civilization quite matched. Historians still debate the significance of cat mummification in Egyptian society, and some question whether it was a purely spiritual practice or if there were practical reasons behind it as well. Some argue that the mummification of cats was a way to control the population of sacred animals. Cats were revered, after all, and it's possible that there was a need to regulate their numbers. Others suggest that the practice of mummification was simply a way of ensuring the continuity of divine favor. By preserving the cat, its protective power would continue long after its earthly life had ended. One thing is certain, though the mummification of cats in ancient Egypt speaks to the incredible reverence and respect they held for these creatures. Cats weren't just companions or household pets. They were sacred beings, imbued with the essence of the divine, and their mummification ensured that their power and protection would continue beyond the mortal world. The bond between the ancient Egyptians and their cats was more than just one of affection. It was a spiritual connection that transcended life and death. So, as you settle in and perhaps feel the gentle purring of your own cat, know that in ancient Egypt, the role of these quiet, mysterious creatures was seen as nothing less than divine. They weren't just keeping you company. They were guardians of your soul, protectors of your home, and links to the gods themselves. How's that for an amazing role to play in the world? As we continue our exploration of Egypt's divine connection with cats, it's time to dig into something just as fascinating: how the moods of these sacred animals influenced rituals and spiritual practices in ancient Egypt. Cats were more than just passive figures in Egyptian society. They were active participants in the spiritual world, and their behavior was believed to offer insights into the will of the gods. Egyptians didn't simply look at the world through the lens of gods and rituals. They observed the behavior of animals, particularly cats, for signs, omens, and divine guidance. The way a cat acted could determine the outcome of a ritual, or even foretell the fate of an individual or a family. Picture this for a moment. You're in an ancient Egyptian temple, surrounded by incense smoke that twists and curls toward the high ceilings. The flickering light from oil lamps casts shadows across the stone walls, and priests are chanting incantations to the gods. In the middle of the temple, a cat moves slowly, its eyes narrowing as it walks past the statues of gods and priests. The priests pause, holding their breath, watching the cat. If the cat is calm, it's a sign that Bastet's favor has been granted to the ceremony, that the gods are pleased, and that the offerings will be accepted. But if the cat shows signs of agitation, maybe it hisses, or even bolts toward the exit, it's a sign that the ritual is off track, that the gods are displeased, or that some cosmic disturbance has occurred. The mood of the cat became a barometer for the success or failure of religious practices. Cats, in their unpredictable and mysterious ways, were considered intermediaries between the human world and the divine realm. Historians still argue whether cats' moods were seen as a direct manifestation of the gods' emotions, or whether it was more of a symbolic reflection of the unpredictability of life itself. Some scholars suggest that priests might have trained certain cats to act in particular ways, during ceremonies, using the cats as living omens to guide their decisions. Others believed that the cat's behavior was truly mystical, interpreted as a direct sign from the gods that couldn't be manipulated by human hands. Whatever the case, one thing is clear. The Egyptians placed immense spiritual significance on the actions of their cats. This wasn't just limited to the temples. At home, a cat's behavior could also influence the actions of its owners. If a cat was acting skittish or showing signs of distress, Egyptians might take it as an indication that there was some sort of imbalance in their lives. Perhaps their spiritual rituals needed to be adjusted, or maybe they needed to offer more to the gods. On the other hand, if a cat was calm, affectionate, and playful, it was seen as a sign that all was well, that divine favor was shining down on them. Cats, much like the gods themselves, had the power to control the energy of a space simply through their presence. Their behavior was observed carefully, and it wasn't just about watching for signs of distress or comfort. It was about understanding the deeper currents of divine will that were being expressed through these subtle creatures. This wasn't just superstition or folklore. It was a deeply ingrained part of Egyptian religious practice. The sacredness of cats was tied to the belief that they were the physical embodiment of the divine, that the mood of a cat could reveal the hidden forces at play in the universe. But it wasn't all about rituals and omens. Cats were also involved in some of the more celebratory aspects of Egyptian religious life, particularly in festivals dedicated to Bastet. These celebrations were grand affairs, filled with music, dancing, and offerings to the goddess. During festivals, cats were often honored as living symbols of Bastet's grace and protection. They were paraded through the streets, and special offerings were made to them. People would bring their cats to the temple, offering them as sacrifices or simply as a token of gratitude for the protection they had received. The most famous of these festivals took place at the city of Bubastis, which was dedicated to the worship of Bastet. The Festival of Bastet was one of the largest and most popular celebrations in ancient Egypt, drawing people from all over the country. It was a time of joy and revelry, a time when the gods' blessings were believed to be at their peak. Cats, as Bastet's sacred creatures, played a significant role in the festivities. During this time, it was not uncommon for families to bring their cats to the temple in the hopes of receiving special blessings for the year ahead. The cats were treated with the utmost reverence, and their behavior was carefully observed. If a cat acted in a calm, peaceful manner during the festival, it was seen as a sign that Bastet was pleased, that her protection would continue to be bestowed upon the people. If a cat showed signs of distress or aggression, it was interpreted as a sign that the gods were displeased, and the people might seek out a priest to perform a ritual to restore divine favor. In addition to festivals, cats were also involved in the everyday spiritual practices of Egyptians. It was believed that having a cat in the home would invite Bastet's protection into the family's life. But this wasn't just about keeping away pests. It was about aligning the household with divine order. Cats, in their serene and occasionally unpredictable way, helped to maintain the balance between the sacred and the mundane. They reminded the people that the divine was always present, always watching, and that even the smallest action could have cosmic significance. In a world so deeply connected to the gods, where divine favor could make or break a family's fortune, cats were not simply companions. They were divine representatives, conduits for the will of the gods. The Egyptians' deep reverence for cats was rooted in the belief that everything in the world was interconnected. from the gods in the heavens to the smallest creature on the earth. Cats were not just animals. They were divine messengers, powerful symbols of protection, and harbingers of cosmic balance. Their moods weren't just reflections of their own emotional states. They were the visible manifestations of the will of the gods. The silent guides who could lead a family to peace or alert them to danger, simply through a glance, a purr, or even the flick of a tail. It's a stunning thought, isn't it, that the seemingly mundane moments of everyday life, like watching a cat stretch lazily in the sun, could actually be tied to the grand, unfathomable forces that govern the universe. Now that we've seen how the moods and behaviors of cats shaped religious rituals and spiritual practices in ancient Egypt, let's take a closer look at how Bastet, the goddess who embodied these divine feline qualities, was worshipped and revered in the physical world. We'll explore how her connection to cats influenced not only everyday life, but also Egyptian society's understanding of fertility, motherhood, and the cycles of nature. Bastet, as the goddess of fertility, was believed to hold power over reproduction, both in humans and animals. Her role extended far beyond the protection of homes and families. She was also seen as a symbol of life's ongoing cycle, particularly the growth of crops and the birth of new generations. In a society so closely tied to agriculture, fertility was a central concern, and Bastet's influence in this realm was profound. Her connection to fertility was not limited to human birth, but extended to the land itself. The Egyptians believed that Bastet, in her feline form, was the divine force that nurtured the earth, helping crops to grow and providing food for the people. Cats, as her sacred companions, were seen as direct manifestations of her nurturing power. The image of a cat, calm and serene, symbolized the fertility and abundance that Bastet was believed to bring. When a cat was relaxed, it was seen as a sign that fertility was in balance, that both human life and the agricultural cycle were thriving under the goddess's favor. But Bastet's connection to fertility wasn't just about agriculture. She also represented the fertility of families, particularly in terms of motherhood and childbearing. Cats, being fiercely protective of their young, embodied the maternal instincts that were central to Bastet's identity. The goddess was often depicted as a loving mother, fiercely guarding her children while nurturing them with gentle care. The ancient Egyptians believed that by invoking Bastet, they could ensure the fertility and health of their families. Women who were seeking to conceive might pray to Bastet, asking for her favor in the hopes of becoming mothers. The presence of a cat in the home was thought to be a blessing, a sign that Bastet's maternal protection was at hand. Cats, in their natural behavior, were often seen as symbols of the very qualities that Bastet personified. They were independent yet protective, calm yet fierce, nurturing yet capable of swift action when needed. This duality, reflecting both the gentle and destructive aspects of life, was central to Bastet's identity. As the goddess of fertility, she symbolized both the creation of new life and the protection of that life from harm. Cats, with their unpredictable nature, were the perfect embodiment of this balance. They could be warm and comforting one moment, and then strike out in defense of their young or territory the next. Bastet's connection to motherhood was so significant that she was often depicted in the company of her feline companions, who were sometimes shown caring for their own kittens. This imagery emphasized the goddess's role as a protector of families and her ability to bring peace and prosperity to the home. Cats, as sacred symbols of Bastet's protection, were often kept close to mothers and children, offering both physical and spiritual security. The Egyptians believed that by keeping cats in the home, they were inviting the divine protection of Bastet into their lives. Historians still debate the extent to which Bastet's connection to fertility was a reflection of societal views on gender and family life. Some suggest that Bastet's role as a nurturing, maternal goddess was a way for the Egyptians to elevate the status of women in society, as her protective, motherly nature mirrored the ideal role of women in the home. Others argue that Bastet's dual nature, both protective and destructive, symbolized the power of women to both nurture and defend, reflecting a more complex view of femininity. Either way, Bastet's association with fertility, motherhood, and protection was central to her worship and had a profound impact on Egyptian society's views of women and family life. In addition to her role in fertility and motherhood, Bastet was also linked to the natural cycles of life, death, and rebirth. In the same way that cats would give birth to new litters of kittens, symbolizing the continuity of life, Bastet was believed to bring about the cycle of rebirth in the world. This connection to the natural order was particularly significant in ancient Egypt, where the rhythms of nature were deeply intertwined with religious beliefs. The flooding of the Nile River, which brought life-giving water to the land and ensured the success of crops, was seen as a divine gift, linked to the god's favor. Bastet, as the goddess of fertility, was thought to have a direct influence over this cycle of life. Cats, in their ability to give birth and protect their young, were seen as physical representations of this cyclical process. The birth of new kittens was seen as a metaphor for the renewal of life itself, a constant cycle that was both protected and nurtured by Bastet. Bastet's association with fertility and rebirth extended to the Egyptian afterlife as well. The Egyptians believed in the concept of Aru, the field of reeds, a paradise where the soul could rest after death, to ensure a smooth transition into the afterlife. It was important for the soul to pass through the various challenges and tests of the underworld. Cats, as divine protectors, were believed to accompany the deceased on this journey, guiding them safely through the dangers of the underworld. The goddess Bastet, with her feline nature, was seen as a protector who helped ensure the soul's safe passage to the afterlife. Cats, as sacred symbols of her protection, were often included in tombs and burial sites, ensuring that the deceased would have her favor in the next life. Now, imagine walking through an ancient Egyptian tomb, where the walls are lined with detailed paintings and carvings, each depicting the life and afterlife of the individual buried within. And there, among the offerings and treasures, you might find a mummified cat, its small form wrapped in linen, its eyes painted on the bandages. This cat wasn't just an animal. It was a guardian for the soul of the deceased, an embodiment of Bastet's eternal protection and fertility. Cats, as intermediaries between life and death, were essential to the Egyptians' understanding of the spiritual world, ensuring that both the living and the dead would be under the goddess's care. The worship of Bastet, deeply connected to the cycles of nature, the protection of family, and the fertility of the earth, was woven into the very fabric of Egyptian life. Cats, as her earthly companions, played a central role in this divine system, symbolizing the balance between life, death, and rebirth. Through their presence, behavior, and sacred mummification, cats reminded the Egyptians of the ever-present influence of the divine in their everyday lives. As we continue our exploration of cats in ancient Egypt, let's shift our focus to the royal realm, where cats weren't merely revered. They were symbols of divine power. In fact, cats played an essential role in the grand narratives of the pharaohs and the political power structures of Egypt. It's not just that cats were sacred to the goddess Bastet. They were seen as divine protectors of the royal family, symbols of strength, and even instruments of political control. In a society where power was tied to divine favor, the presence of cats, with their clear connection to the gods, was a way to solidify the pharaoh's authority. Imagine the scene at the royal court. The grand halls of the palace, adorned with gold and precious stones, filled with courtiers and priests, all bowing before the pharaoh, who sits like a living god on his throne. But there's something else in the room, too, something smaller, more subtle, but no less powerful. A cat, moving gracefully across the room. This cat isn't just a pet. It's a visible symbol of divine protection, a direct link between the pharaoh and the gods. In ancient Egypt, the presence of a cat in the royal court was a way of demonstrating that the ruler was favored by the gods, especially Bastet, who represented both strength and nurturing. The cat became a living embodiment of the balance between power and protection, between fierce leadership and the care of the people. Historians still debate whether cats were intentionally used as symbols of divine favor in the political sphere, or whether their presence simply reflected their widespread religious significance. But one thing is certain: the cat's role in the royal court was deeply symbolic. By keeping cats as part of the royal household, the pharaoh was demonstrating his connection to Bastet and, by extension, to the divine order itself. Cats were seen as protectors not only of the physical space of the palace, but also of the political and spiritual power of the ruler, just as a cat could ward off intruders in the home. It was believed that they could also protect the pharaoh's rule from external threats, both earthly and divine. Cats in the royal court were also part of a broader strategy of using religious symbols to cement the power of the monarchy. The pharaoh was not just a king. He was seen as a living god, a direct representative of the divine on earth. His power was seen as coming from the gods themselves. And part of maintaining that power involved demonstrating his divine favor. By keeping cats in the royal household, the pharaoh was not just showing that he had Bastet's protection. He was aligning himself with her divine authority. In this way, the cat became an integral part of the royal symbolism, reinforcing the idea that the pharaoh ruled with the god's blessing. Beyond the royal courts, cats also played an important role in Egyptian diplomacy. When Egypt interacted with other nations, the presence of sacred animals, including cats, was often used as a diplomatic gesture, a way of showing power and divine favor. Cats were sometimes sent as gifts to foreign rulers, symbolizing Egypt's strength and its close connection to the gods. These cats weren't just animals. They were emblems of Egypt's power, offering divine protection and asserting Egypt's superiority on the world stage. The exchange of sacred animals, like cats, helped cement political alliances and fostered the perception of Egypt as a nation under the direct protection of powerful deities. But the pharaoh wasn't the only one to benefit from the cat's divine symbolism. Throughout Egyptian society, the presence of cats was seen as an extension of divine favor, a reminder that the gods were watching over the people. Cats, as protectors of the home and guardians of spiritual balance, were often present in temples and homes alike. In fact, It was not uncommon for Egyptians to place statues or images of cats in their homes as symbols of protection, or to keep cats in their temples to ensure that the gods' favor would remain with them. These cats didn't just represent divine power, they actively participated in maintaining it. The association between cats and the royal family extended beyond just symbols of protection. It was also about maintaining Ma'at, the concept of cosmic balance and order that was central to Egyptian religion. The pharaoh's role was to uphold Ma'at, ensuring that the world remained in harmony. Cats, in their mysterious and unpredictable nature, were seen as a living embodiment of this balance. They could be calm and nurturing, but also fierce and protective when necessary. This duality of being both gentle and fierce mirrored the qualities that the pharaoh was expected to embody. The pharaoh, as the living god, had to strike the right balance between nurturing the people and defending the kingdom from enemies. Just as a cat could balance its affectionate side with its defensive instincts. This delicate balance was also reflected in the way cats were treated within the royal family. The royal cats were often pampered, with the finest food and care. They were allowed to roam freely within the palace, their every movement observed and appreciated as a sign of divine presence. These cats were often given special attention, with priests and attendants ensuring that they were well fed and cared for. The treatment of these cats wasn't just a reflection of their sacred status. It was a way to maintain the harmony between the divine and the earthly. By keeping the cats healthy and happy, the royal family ensured that their connection to the gods remained strong. But even outside of the palace, cats were highly regarded for their protective qualities. They were seen as guardians, not only of the home, but also of Egypt's borders. As strange as it may seem, cats were sometimes even considered a part of Egypt's military strategy. In battle, the pharaoh's soldiers were believed to be protected by the divine favor of Bastet, which was symbolized by the presence of cats. It wasn't uncommon for soldiers to bring cats with them into battle, either for protection or simply as a sign of divine favor. The cats weren't directly involved in the fighting, of course, but their presence was a reminder that the gods were on Egypt's side. Historians still argue whether cats played a more symbolic or functional role in warfare. Some believe that the presence of cats in the army was largely symbolic, a way to remind the soldiers that they were protected by the divine. Others suggest that the cats may have had a more practical role, by guarding the food supplies and protecting the camp from pests. They ensured that the soldiers could focus on battle without worrying about disease or food shortages. Either way, the idea that a cat could have an influence on the outcome of war speaks to the profound reverence Egyptians had for these creatures. In the end, the role of cats in the royal sphere was just as important as their role in the home. Whether they were protecting the pharaoh's rule, maintaining Ma'at, or symbolizing Egypt's divine favor, cats were deeply intertwined with the political and spiritual fabric of ancient Egypt. As symbols of divine protection and guardians of the royal family's power, cats were more than just animals. They were a living manifestation of the gods themselves. So, the next time you find yourself watching a cat curl up in your lap, remember that in the world of ancient Egypt, that seemingly simple creature might have been holding the balance of the entire kingdom in its paws. As we turn our attention to the military and more strategic aspects of ancient Egyptian society, we see that the power of cats extended beyond the royal courts and into the realm of warfare. Cats, as sacred animals, weren't just passive symbols of protection. They were believed to have an active role in shaping the fortunes of Egypt in battle. Now, You might be wondering how a cat could possibly influence the outcome of a military conflict, especially when we think of war being such a fierce and physical endeavor. But in ancient Egypt, where the divine and earthly realms were so closely intertwined, the answer is clear. The presence of cats was a reminder of divine protection, a sign that Bastet herself was watching over the soldiers and guiding their hands. Let's paint a picture. It's the heat of battle, the clash of weapons echoing through the desert air. Soldiers are focused on their opponents, preparing for a decisive strike. Amidst the chaos, imagine a quiet observer, a cat, sitting calmly in the shadows, watching with unblinking eyes. To the soldiers, this cat wasn't just a passive bystander. It was a living symbol of Bastet's favor, an embodiment of divine protection that was believed to influence the outcome of the battle. In times of war, Egyptians would often bring cats with them, or even send them into battle zones, tsaniranes, to act as physical and spiritual guardians. The belief was that these cats had the power to guard the soldiers' spirits, ensuring that the gods' will was on their side. Historians still debate the exact role cats played on the battlefield, whether they were simply a psychological tool or if they had a more active role in protecting the soldiers. Some scholars believe that the soldiers carried cats with them to boost morale, reminding them that the gods were on their side and that they were under the protection of Bastet. Others argue that cats played a more practical role in warfare, protecting food supplies and guarding military camps from pests, which in turn reduced the risk of disease spreading among the troops. Regardless of how they were used, one thing is certain: cats were seen as powerful, divine creatures, and their presence in war was a symbol of the ongoing connection between the warriors and the gods. In fact, cats' role in military strategy extended beyond just the battlefield itself. The Egyptians believed that the strength of their military forces was directly tied to the divine will of the gods, and that the gods, especially Bastet, would favor their side in battle. It wasn't just about having strong warriors or superior tactics. It was about ensuring that the gods were on their side. By carrying cats into battle, Egyptian soldiers believed they were directly invoking the protection of Bastet and ensuring that her fierce, protective nature would be with them as they fought. The cats became physical embodiments of the goddess's divine will, reminding the soldiers that they were part of a cosmic struggle, one in which the gods had a hand in the outcome. And just as Bastet's protection was invoked in battle, her wrath could also be called upon to defend the kingdom from its enemies. Cats, as symbols of Bastet's dual nature, both nurturing and destructive, were believed to have the power to ward off intruders, whether physical enemies or spiritual threats. This belief wasn't confined to the battlefield, but was also a part of Egypt's broader defensive strategies. When Egypt faced foreign invasions, the presence of cats and the invocation of Bastet's power were seen as part of the spiritual defense that would ensure the kingdom's survival. The military significance of cats in ancient Egypt also played into their more mystical role as divine protectors of the royal family. The pharaoh, as both the political and spiritual leader of Egypt, was seen as the living embodiment of the gods on earth. His power, his very right to rule, was seen as coming from divine favor, and part of that favor came in the form of Bastet's protection. Cats, in their calm yet powerful demeanor, were the perfect symbols of that divine favor, representing not only the physical might of the pharaoh's army, but also the invisible spiritual power that guided the kingdom. The presence of a cat in the royal court or military camp was a reminder that the pharaoh's authority was granted by the gods, and that, with the gods' favor, no enemy could prevail. The reverence for cats in military contexts extended beyond Egypt's borders. 2. Foreign rulers who sought alliances or attempted to communicate with Egypt were often presented with sacred gifts, including cats, as symbols of Egypt's strength and divine protection. The act of gifting a cat was more than a diplomatic gesture. It was a powerful symbol of Egypt's connection to the gods, a statement of divine favor, and an assertion of political dominance. A cat wasn't just a gift. It was a way of showcasing Egypt's power over both the physical and spiritual realms. Now, imagine this. An invading army stands at the gates of Egypt, poised to strike. The air is thick with tension, and the clash of weapons seems imminent. But in the shadows, a small group of soldiers move swiftly and quietly, carrying with them the sacred presence of Bastet, cats, carefully guarded and honored, brought to the battlefield as protectors. The soldiers know that the mere presence of these divine creatures will bolster their spirits, remind them of the gods' favor, and perhaps even sway the battle in their favor. In that moment, the cat transcends its role as a domestic animal and becomes a symbol of divine power, an active participant in the fate of the kingdom. In a more symbolic sense, the role of cats in warfare also reflected Egypt's view of the gods as active participants in daily life. The gods weren't distant figures, removed from human affairs. They were intimately involved in every aspect of life, including war. Whether it was Bastet offering her protection on the battlefield or ensuring the well-being of the royal family, the gods were always present, guiding Egypt toward victory and prosperity. And cats, as divine representatives of Bastet, became the living symbols of this ongoing spiritual connection. Their presence was a reminder that even in the most tumultuous of times, Egypt was never truly alone. The gods were always watching, always guiding, and always protecting. Historians still argue about how much influence the spiritual aspect of war actually had on military decisions. Some claim that the invocation of Bastet and the presence of cats were more for psychological comfort and morale boosting, a way to remind the soldiers that they were protected by the divine. Others suggest that the connection between the military and the gods was so deeply ingrained that it shaped the very course of Egyptian warfare. Whatever the case may be, it's clear that cats were not just passive observers in Egypt's military history. They were divine protectors, spiritual warriors in their own right, and powerful symbols of Egypt's strength and divine favor. So, as we continue to reflect on the multifaceted role of cats in ancient Egypt, remember that they weren't just revered for their companionship or their ability to catch mice. Cats were divine symbols, protectors of the royal family, warriors in their own right, and spiritual allies on the battlefield. They held the power to shift the course of wars, ensure divine favor, and safeguard the kingdom. The next time you see a cat curl up peacefully by your side, think of Bastet's fierce yet nurturing gaze, watching over Egypt and guiding the hands of those who fought to protect it. As we approach the final stages of our journey through ancient Egypt's spiritual and cultural relationship with cats, we must confront one of the more sobering aspects of this sacred feline bond: the eventual decline in the worship of cats and the rise of new religious beliefs and foreign influences. For centuries, cats held an unchallenged place in Egyptian society, revered as divine protectors, symbols of power, and guardians of the royal family. But nothing in ancient Egypt, or in the world at large, lasts forever. As Egypt's political, social, and religious landscapes shifted, so too did the reverence for these once sacred creatures. The decline of the worship of cats and their transition into a more ordinary status mirrors the larger changes in Egyptian civilization. To understand this shift, let's first look at the major events that contributed to the erosion of the reverence for cats in Egypt. One of the most significant turning points came with the arrival of foreign invaders and the eventual conquest of Egypt by the Persians, Greeks, and Romans. With these invasions, new cultural, religious, and political influences entered Egypt, and the old ways of worship were challenged. The arrival of new gods and new belief systems began to dilute the influence of traditional Egyptian gods, including Bastet, and with it, the sacred status of cats. Historians still debate whether this shift was purely the result of foreign conquest, or whether it was part of a larger, internal change within Egyptian society. Some suggest that the rise of new religious practices, such as the spread of Christianity and the eventual decline of the traditional Egyptian pantheon, played a role in diminishing the role of cats in daily life. Others argue that the decline of the power of the pharaohs and the shift to a more decentralized form of government under foreign rule weakened the role of gods like Bastet, which had once been central to the identity of the Egyptian state. Regardless of the cause, the decline of the cat's divine status was a gradual process, one that marked the end of an era in Egyptian religious life. The transition from the worship of cats to the decline of their sacred status wasn't just a loss of spiritual power. It also had practical consequences for the people of Egypt. In the later stages of Egyptian history, as foreign invaders continued to exert their influence over the land, cats began to lose their elevated status. The great temples dedicated to Bastet, such as the one in Bubastis, gradually fell into disrepair as the focus shifted away from the old gods. Bastet's role as the protector of Egypt, and by extension, the protector of its royal family, became less central to the cultural and political identity of the kingdom. As the old temples crumbled and the divine connection between cats and the gods faded, cats themselves were relegated to a more mundane role. The reverence they once enjoyed slowly dissipated, and cats began to be seen more as pets and less as sacred symbols. Yet, even as their spiritual role diminished, cats continued to maintain a special place in Egyptian homes. They were still admired for their grace and beauty, but the divine significance they once held was no longer as pronounced. Cats, once symbols of divine protection, were now simply animals that shared the homes of the people, no longer tied to the spiritual and political fabric of Egyptian society. Interestingly, even as Egypt's own traditions waned, cats began to take on new roles in other parts of the world. The Greeks and Romans, who had long been fascinated by Egyptian culture, adopted some of the reverence for cats, though not in the same divine context. In these cultures, cats were valued for their hunting abilities, their independent nature, and their ability to keep homes free of vermin. But the sacred aspect of the cat, particularly its connection to Bastet, was largely lost. Instead, cats became valued as companions and protectors of the home, but without the divine charge they once carried in Egypt. As the ancient Egyptian world slipped further into history, the image of the cat remained a strong cultural symbol, one that echoed back to the greatness of Egypt's past. In many ways, the fall of the worship of Bastet and the decline of the sacred status of cats marked the end of an era of Egypt's spiritual dominance. Yet, even in their decline, cats still retained an aura of mystique. The symbolism of Bastet's protector, strong, graceful, and fiercely independent, lingered, particularly in the art and literature that survived from the ancient world. And though the reverence for cats waned, the memory of their sacred role persisted, influencing cultures for centuries to come. Despite the decline in their divine status, cats continued to hold a place of affection in Egyptian culture. They were still associated with the domestic sphere and with the protection of the home. But the connection to the gods was no longer as strong. Over time, the influence of Egypt's ancient gods, Bastet included, began to wane. And the once sacred cats found themselves in a world that no longer viewed them as divine messengers, but as simple companions. Still, their connection to Egypt's grand history remained. And even though the power of their spiritual role faded, cats would go on to carve a new identity for themselves in the cultures of the world. Historians still argue about how the decline of the worship of cats and the rise of new religious practices affected the identity of the Egyptian people. Some suggest that this transition reflected a broader shift in Egyptian culture, a shift from a polytheistic society focused on divine forces to one increasingly influenced by external religions. Others point out that the decline of the worship of cats marked the end of Egypt's era of greatness, as the empire was slowly overtaken by foreign powers. Whatever the true cause, one thing is clear: the decline of cat worship was part of a larger transformation in Egypt. A transformation that marked the end of the ancient Egyptian world as it had once been. In the end, the fall of the worship of cats was a poignant reminder of the transient nature of all things, even the divine. Cats, once seen as sacred symbols of Bastet's protection, would be redefined by history as simple companions. But their legacy would endure. The power of their presence, both in Egypt and in the world at large, remained long after their spiritual significance faded. In the end, cats would continue to capture the hearts of people around the world, their eyes still gleaming with the mystery of the divine, a quiet reminder of their once great role in the ancient world. As we continue to explore the shifting landscape of Egypt and its relationship with cats, let's now turn our attention to the legacy of these sacred creatures. Although the worship of cats and their divine connection to Bastet may have faded, their influence persisted far beyond Egypt's borders, leaving an imprint on cultures across the world. Even in their decline, the symbol of the cat, particularly the sacred feline, continued to represent something greater than just an animal. Cats, despite no longer being viewed as gods, became symbols of mystery, elegance, and grace. In Egypt, the fall of the cat's divine status coincided with the rise of new belief systems, such as Christianity, which brought with it a radically different approach to animal worship. Christianity, with its monotheistic worldview, did not emphasize the veneration of animals in the same way as the Egyptians had. The cat, once a divine protector and a living symbol of the goddess Bastet, was now relegated to a more mundane role in society. Cats were no longer seen as divine creatures with mystical powers. Instead, they were simply domestic animals, valued for their ability to control vermin and as affectionate companions. But despite this shift in status, the mystique of the cat never truly disappeared. In fact, the decline of the ancient Egyptian religion and the end of the worship of cats gave way to a new, more universal fascination with these enigmatic animals. The image of the cat, graceful, independent, and slightly aloof, took on new meaning in cultures far beyond Egypt. In ancient Greece, for instance, cats were admired for their hunting skills and their silent, stealthy movements. though they were not worshipped as gods. They were viewed as symbols of independence and mystery. The Greeks, who had a complex relationship with animals, respected the cat's ability to thrive in domestic spaces and maintain its own autonomy. This respect for the cat's independence and grace would continue in the centuries that followed, influencing the way cats were seen in Western culture. As the Roman Empire rose to prominence, cats followed, though not in the same revered status they once held in Egypt. Cats were often kept as pets by Roman citizens, and their ability to control pests was highly valued. But it was the Romans' love of luxury and beauty that also contributed to the rise of the cat as a symbol of elegance. In Roman art, cats were sometimes depicted alongside the elite, representing both status and the refined lifestyle of the Roman aristocracy. Though their divine power was no longer acknowledged, cats were still seen as symbols of grace, and their elegance would become an enduring part of their cultural legacy. But perhaps the most lasting legacy of the cat's sacred history lies in its role as a symbol of mystery and independence. The aloofness of the cat. Its ability to move between worlds without being tied to one particular place seemed to reflect the very essence of the ancient gods that once watched over Egypt. In the centuries following the fall of the Egyptian Empire, cats continued to be seen as creatures of the divine. Their eyes, sharp and unblinking, seemed to gaze into the depths of the unknown. Just as the ancient Egyptians believed that Bastet's gaze could pierce through the veil of the earthly and the spiritual worlds. Historians still debate whether the cat's continued cultural significance is a direct reflection of its divine past or simply a projection of human fascination with its mysterious nature. Some argue that the cat's association with independence and aloofness was deeply rooted in the spiritual traditions of ancient Egypt. After all, the cat had long been seen as a protector, both of the home and of the soul, and it was easy for people in later societies to see the cat as a guardian of the sacred and mysterious. Others suggest that the symbolism of the cat was a product of its natural behavior, which, in its quiet confidence, seemed to evoke a sense of ancient wisdom and otherworldliness. Regardless of the reasons behind its lasting cultural impact, the cat's status as a symbol of the divine and the mysterious did not vanish with the decline of the Egyptian gods. Over time, the image of the cat would become a powerful cultural icon associated with beauty, power, and independence. From the art of ancient Rome to the stories of medieval Europe, cats remained symbols of both grace and mystery, their behavior embodying the complexities of the world around them. Even in more modern times, the cat continues to be revered in various cultures, whether as a beloved pet or as a symbol of witchcraft, mystery, and independence. In the 19th and 20th centuries, the cat's role in popular culture underwent yet another transformation. During the Victorian era, the cat became a symbol of domesticity and elegance. The Victorians' fascination with pets and their careful attention to breeding created a new kind of cultural reverence for cats, though still far removed from the divine worship seen in Egypt. Cats were admired for their beauty and grace, and they became common figures in the homes of the upper classes, where they were often featured in portraits and still-life paintings. The symbolic power of the cat was no longer linked to the gods, but to the idea of domestic perfection and refinement. In the 20th century, the cat's mystique resurfaced in the form of popular culture. Cats became symbols of rebellion and independence, often featured in stories and films as mysterious, aloof figures with their own agendas. The rise of the internet and social media brought a new era of admiration for cats, as they became beloved figures in memes and viral videos, captivating millions with their quirky personalities and charming independence. The cat's enduring popularity can be seen in how it continues to fascinate and delight people from all walks of life. The cat's journey from divine protector to beloved companion and cultural icon speaks to the deep, enduring connection between humans and these enigmatic creatures. Although the sacred worship of cats may have faded with the rise of new religions and changing political landscapes, their legacy endures in our fascination with their mysterious nature. The cat's role in ancient Egypt may have been diminished over time, but its status as a symbol of power, grace, and independence lives on, reminding us that the divine can often be found in the most unexpected places. As we continue to reflect on the legacy of cats, it's impossible to ignore how their status as divine symbols in ancient Egypt not only influenced their cultural role across the ages, but also their integration into various aspects of daily life and society. The ancient Egyptians had a unique ability to connect the divine with the practical. And in the case of cats, this ability was woven throughout both their religious and everyday lives. From the sacred temples dedicated to Bastet to the simple presence of a cat in the home, these creatures became a powerful thread linking the human and the divine, the spiritual and the earthly. Despite the eventual decline in the sacred worship of cats, their practical role as guardians continued to be vital. Even after their divine status faded, cats retained their value as protectors of the home. The Egyptians may have stopped seeing their cats as sacred agents of the gods, but the practical benefits of having a cat around remained undeniable. Cats continued to be beloved for their ability to keep homes free from vermin, which was crucial in a time when pests could spread disease and ruin food supplies. The ability of cats to hunt and keep the home secure ensured that they were still respected as vital members of the household. But the role of cats in the home wasn't just about pest control. Cats, as creatures of grace and independence, continued to symbolize a certain kind of mystery. And even within the framework of everyday life, their presence often reminded Egyptians and others of the divine order. Just as they had once served as symbols of divine protection in temples and royal courts, they now served as smaller, more subtle reminders of the spiritual forces that govern the world. In the homes of the wealthy, cats were often kept as cherished companions. Much like how we might view pets today, they were given names, treated with affection, and seen as loyal protectors of the home. Cats, with their serene yet unpredictable behavior, were still thought to carry the essence of their divine origins. The way they would curl up peacefully one moment and then suddenly dart off at the slightest noise seemed to mirror the ancient Egyptian view of the gods, capable of both peace and destruction, ever watchful, ever present, even in the decline of their religious status. This subtle connection to the divine persisted, making cats not just pets, but symbols of the mysteries of the universe. This duality, being both earthly companions and spiritual symbols, was a defining feature of the cat's role in ancient Egypt. The Egyptians, who saw the world as a place full of divine forces, believed that the animals they interacted with were never just animals. They were reflections of cosmic forces, agents of balance. Cats, more than any other creature, embodied this idea, able to transcend the mundane and connect with the divine. It wasn't just their sleek appearance or their graceful movements that made them special. It was their ability to represent the fluid, ever-changing nature of the gods themselves. The slow decline in the worship of Bastet and the eventual fading of the cat's divine status didn't completely erase their symbolic importance. In fact, as we move through history, we see how the echoes of Egypt's reverence for cats influenced later cultures. The ancient Greeks, as we've seen, admired cats for their elegance and independence. But they also recognized their mystical qualities. Cats were associated with Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, and like the Egyptians, the Greeks saw them as symbols of strength, grace, and mystery. In Roman times, cats were kept primarily for their hunting ability, not abilities, but they were also appreciated for their beauty and elegance. Roman elites would keep cats as symbols of refinement and status, much as they had in Egypt. The Roman love for pets and luxury found a natural home in their appreciation for the sleek, mysterious cat. Though the divine connection had faded into a more secular relationship. Still, the idea that cats were graceful and somewhat aloof lingered. They were valued as companions, but also as creatures of mystery, offering a link to something more profound. As Christianity spread through the Roman Empire, the symbolic status of cats shifted once again. In Christian teachings, cats were often associated with witchcraft and the supernatural. The connection to Egypt's divine legacy may have been lost. But cats, particularly black cats, took on a new mystique. In medieval Europe, they were believed to possess magical powers, and in some places, they were seen as protectors of witches. The mystique that had once surrounded them as symbols of divine protection evolved into something darker, more mysterious. Cats were no longer protectors of homes and families in the divine sense, but were believed to guard secrets, spirits, and otherworldly forces. By the time we reach the modern era, cats had fully transitioned from divine protectors to beloved pets in most cultures, but their mystique remained. Today, cats are often associated with mystery, independence, and even a touch of magic. Their role in ancient Egypt, however, is never truly forgotten. The legacy of Bastet and the cats, who were revered as sacred beings, lives on in the way we view these creatures as companions. Cats may no longer hold the divine power they once did, but their cultural significance remains as strong as ever. Historians still debate the reasons behind the cat's enduring popularity across different cultures and time periods. Some attribute it to the cat's mysterious and independent nature, which continues to captivate human imaginations. Others argue that the cat's historical connection to the divine in ancient Egypt helped cement its status as a creature of great significance. Whatever the reason, one thing is clear: the cat's legacy, born from the ancient worship of Bastet, has endured through millennia, adapting and changing with the times, but always retaining its mystique. So, next time you sit with a cat, whether it's curled up beside you, staring out the window, or giving you a slow blink of affection, remember that you're in the presence of a creature whose ancestors were once seen as divine, whose behavior was believed to guide the fate of nations, and whose gaze once held the power of the gods themselves. Cats may have lost their divine status, but their aura of mystery and grace remains as powerful as ever, a silent reminder of the sacred bond they once shared with ancient Egypt. As we approach the later chapters of this history, it's fascinating to consider how the reverence for cats in ancient Egypt has shaped our modern understanding of these animals. Today, we often think of cats as charming companions, independent and aloof, yet still loyal. However, the path from the sacred creatures of Egypt to the beloved pets of the modern world is a journey marked by cultural shifts, historical transformations, and the enduring mystique of these enigmatic animals. We've explored how, in ancient Egypt, cats were not only sacred protectors, but also powerful symbols of divine favor. They were the physical embodiment of the goddess Bastit's protection, guiding both the living and the dead through the cosmic order. Even after the decline of the worship of Bastet, the influence of these cats lingered in the world, becoming woven into the fabric of the cultural and spiritual narratives of many societies. From ancient Greece to medieval Europe, cats' association with the divine gradually faded. Yet their symbolic role as mysterious, independent creatures endured, allowing them to transition seamlessly into our modern-day culture. Cats' symbolic legacy extends far beyond ancient Egypt. As the centuries passed, they became associated with mystery, independence, and power. One of the most enduring legacies of their sacred role in Egypt is the way cats are often portrayed today, as mysterious, almost magical creatures. This association has been perpetuated in literature, art, and even folklore, where cats frequently appear as symbols of power, wisdom, and protection. It's no surprise that cats are often featured in stories of witches, magic, and the supernatural. The connection between cats and magic is especially prominent in Western cultures. During the Middle Ages, for example, cats, particularly black ones, became associated with witches and witchcraft. In some parts of Europe, it was believed that witches could transform into cats, or that cats were their familiars, aiding them in their magical practices. This connection to the supernatural may have drawn inspiration from the ancient Egyptian belief that cats had an almost divine connection to the spiritual world, a connection that allowed them to move seamlessly between the realms of the living and the dead. But even with their mystical associations, cats have also been admired for their more down-to-earth qualities. In many cultures, they are seen as protectors of the home, guardians of food stores, and guardians of the family's well-being. This practical role, stemming from their ability to hunt and control pests, has made them invaluable companions in agricultural societies, and even in modern times, where food security is less of a concern. Cats are still often celebrated for their role in maintaining the harmony of the household. Cats are also deeply integrated into the fabric of modern popular culture. Just think about how cats have gained a massive following on the internet. From viral videos to memes, cats have captured the hearts of millions worldwide, becoming icons of humor, comfort, and companionship. In many ways, the internet has revitalized the cat's role as a cultural symbol, albeit in a much more playful and light-hearted context. But the appeal of cats hasn't changed fundamentally since their days in ancient Egypt. We still see them as creatures that exist slightly apart from us, mysterious in their own right, yet with a strong sense of loyalty and affection. This continued fascination with cats is a testament to their enduring cultural significance. There's also the more philosophical aspect of the cat's presence in modern life. Cats are often viewed as symbols of independence and freedom, traits that resonate deeply with many people today. In a world where so much of life feels structured and routine, the cat's ability to live on its own terms feels liberating. Cats don't conform to the rules of the world around them. They carve out their own space, choosing when to engage and when to retreat. This autonomy is perhaps the most lasting aspect of their ancient spiritual legacy. For centuries, people have sought to understand the independent, self-sufficient nature of cats. Whether it's through religious worship or simply through companionship, People are drawn to cats because they represent something elusive and powerful. The idea that we too might have the ability to transcend the mundane and connect with something larger than ourselves. This notion isn't just rooted in ancient Egyptian reverence for cats, but in the way we continue to relate to them as symbols of freedom, mystery, and inner strength. As modern pet owners, we might not always recognize the divine role that cats once held in ancient cultures, but there's no denying the special bond we share with them. We look at cats with awe, not just because they're cute or fluffy, but because they carry with them the echoes of ancient worship, the memory of divine protection, and a long history of being seen as the guardians of both the physical and spiritual worlds. Even as our modern society may seem far removed from the ancient Egyptian world, our relationship with cats still reflects a shared understanding of the power, grace, and mystery that these animals embody. It's interesting to think about the subtle ways in which we still see cats through the lens of their ancient role, whether it's through the way we marvel at their independence, the fascination we have with their mysterious behavior, or even the way we turn to them for comfort and companionship. There's no escaping the fact that cats are creatures who have long been associated with a higher power. And while they may no longer hold the divine status they once did in Egypt, they remain among the most revered and cherished animals in the world. Cats, in their mysterious beauty, will always carry a piece of their ancient legacy with them. They remind us of a time when divine forces were believed to walk alongside us, when the world was full of unseen powers and cosmic forces that guided the fates of men and women. And while we may no longer offer prayers to Bastet or worship them as gods, we continue to honor cats in our own way, recognizing them as more than just pets. They are, in many ways, the last living reminder of an ancient, sacred bond, one that ties us to a long-forgotten past and the gods who once watched over us. As we approach the final stretch of our exploration into the sacred history of cats in ancient Egypt, it's important to step back and consider the lasting impact these ancient beliefs have had on the world today. Cats have always held a special place in human culture, but their sacred role in Egypt, as divine protectors and symbols of the gods, is something that continues to shape the way we view and treat them. Even though their religious significance has largely faded over time, the legacy of cats as powerful, mysterious creatures lingers in our collective consciousness, influencing everything from modern art to the way we approach our relationships with animals. One of the most fascinating aspects of the enduring legacy of Egyptian cat worship is the way it has influenced artistic and cultural expressions throughout history. In many cultures, cats are still seen as symbols of beauty, grace, and mystery, and they frequently appear in literature, visual art, and folklore. Whether depicted as majestic figures in paintings or as sly, clever characters in stories, cats often retain their aura of independence and mystery, traits that are undoubtedly tied to their ancient status as spiritual guardians and companions of the divine. Take a moment and think about the prevalence of cats in popular culture today. Whether it's through memes, animated movies, or social media accounts dedicated entirely to cat videos, there's no denying the worldwide fascination with these creatures. It's as if, in some way, we've come full circle back to the ancient reverence for cats, albeit in a more light-hearted form. The internet age has turned cats into the global symbols of fun and humor. Yet at the same time, they continue to symbolize something much deeper: their independence, their quiet strength, and the deep sense of mystery that they still carry with them. This modern adoration for cats is not without roots in their ancient past. Egyptian art, with its intricate depictions of cats and gods, has undoubtedly influenced how we approach cats in contemporary society. From the way cats are often portrayed in art as figures of beauty and poise, to the pervasive images of sleek and mysterious felines that grace advertisements, fashion, and even tattoos. The ancient Egyptians' love for their sacred animals is still alive and well in the world today. The connection between cats and our art was not just a visual one, but also a philosophical and cultural one. In ancient Egypt, cats were considered to embody Ma'at, the principle of balance, order, and truth. This idea that cats could represent a cosmic balance between calm and chaos, creation and destruction, continues to resonate in modern depictions of cats. Artists today often use the image of the cat as a symbol of equilibrium and mystique, reflecting the ancient Egyptian belief that the feline was an intermediary between the human world and the divine. Whether they appear in a contemporary painting, a sculpture, or even a film, cats continue to be seen as the embodiment of mysterious grace and natural power, just as they were in the temples of ancient Egypt. The pervasive influence of Egyptian cat worship also extends into other cultures that came into contact with Egypt, either through trade or conquest. For instance, in the medieval and Renaissance periods, many European cultures came to associate cats with magic and the supernatural. The medieval period, with its intense belief in witches and the occult, was particularly influenced by the Egyptian image of the cat as a mystical being. Cats, especially black ones, were often believed to possess magical powers, just as the Egyptians once believed that cats could communicate with the gods. In the modern Western world, this belief has evolved into the common notion that cats have an otherworldly air about them, capable of seeing things beyond the human eye, even though most people today view them as pets rather than divine beings. However, the cultural significance of cats does not stop at their role in art and folklore. Their deep connection to divine protection and spiritual guidance is still echoed in the way many people treat cats today. Cats continue to be revered as symbols of protection, not only in terms of guarding homes against pests, but also in a more emotional and spiritual sense. Many people look to cats as companions that offer comfort, peace, and emotional support, a modern extension of their ancient role as guardians of the home and the soul. This spiritual aspect of the cat's presence in the home, whether consciously recognized or not, keeps alive the ancient Egyptian belief that cats are linked to the divine forces that govern the universe. While the specific religious context of cat worship has largely been lost, the emotional and spiritual connection between humans and cats remains a strong thread that ties us back to those ancient traditions. Today, the relationship between humans and cats is a reminder of the long and intricate history that these creatures share with us. The bond that we share with them, although often taken for granted, is a continuation of the respect and reverence that began in ancient Egypt. Cats were once divine protectors. Today, they are still seen as sources of comfort, guardians of the household, and companions whose mysterious nature continues to captivate our imaginations. At the same time, there is something profoundly humbling about our relationship with cats. In an era where so much is defined by technology, progress, and the relentless push forward, cats remain a reminder of a simpler, more mystical time. Their quiet, independent presence continues to offer us a reflection of the cosmic forces that once guided the ancient Egyptians. Cats, in all their grace and mystery, continue to serve as a bridge between our everyday lives and something far more ancient and profound, a connection to the divine that transcends time. Looking at it from this perspective, it becomes clear why cats remain such a beloved part of our lives today. Whether they're curled up beside us in the quiet moments of the night, chasing toys with playful abandon, or simply observing us with that ever-watchful gaze, cats remind us of the balance between life and death, the sacred and the mundane. Just as the ancient Egyptians looked to their cats for protection, guidance, and divine favor, we, too, continue to seek comfort and companionship in these mysterious creatures. So, as we close this chapter on the history of Egypt's sacred cats, take a moment to appreciate the legacy that these once revered creatures have left behind. From divine protectors in ancient temples to the beloved pets of modern homes, cats have remained a constant presence in human culture, serving as reminders of the balance between the spiritual and the physical, the divine and the everyday. Whether in ancient Egypt or in your own home, cats continue to carry a piece of something ancient, something sacred, a thread that ties us to a time when the gods themselves walked among us, and the humble cat was their most revered companion. As we come to the final section of our journey through the fascinating history of Egypt's divine connection with cats, let's take a moment to reflect on how this ancient relationship has shaped the way we view cats today, and how their legacy continues to resonate throughout the world. The sacred role of cats in ancient Egypt, their connection to the gods, and their symbolic power have left an indelible mark on human culture. Even as the world has changed, the essence of their significance remains as vibrant and powerful as it ever was. In Egypt, cats were far more than mere companions. They were seen as protectors of the home, divine messengers, and symbols of the gods' favor. This sacred status granted them a place at the heart of Egyptian society, from royal courts to humble homes. Cats embodied the balance of life, death, and rebirth, serving as guardians of the cosmic order. Their connection to Bastet, the goddess of fertility, protection, and motherhood, was central to their spiritual importance. As we have seen, their moods were believed to reflect the will of the gods, guiding the rituals and spiritual practices of an entire civilization. But as Egypt transitioned through different phases, conquered by foreign powers and influenced by new religions, the divine status of cats began to fade. Yet, their presence, once imbued with the power of the gods, never fully disappeared. Cats evolved into beloved pets, cherished not only for their grace and independence, but for the mystery they continued to hold. Whether we recognize it or not, every time we observe a cat in the room, its eyes flicking toward us, or its graceful, almost otherworldly movements, we are reminded of that long, ancient history. We are reminded that, at one time, these creatures were revered as divine beings, capable of bridging the gap between the mortal world and the divine. Today, as cats curl up beside us on the couch or purr contentedly in our laps, their legacy continues in subtle yet profound ways. Their role as protectors of the home persists, even if their divine power is no longer acknowledged. In modern times, cats serve as emotional companions, offering comfort, tranquility, and even a sense of security, in the same way they once guarded Egyptian homes from pests. Today's cats often guard our hearts, providing affection and quiet companionship. But there is more to the modern cat than just companionship. They remain symbols of mystery and independence, traits that have been associated with them for millennia. Cats are still seen as symbols of grace, beauty, and strength, creatures that live on their own terms, with an air of self-sufficiency that makes them both enigmatic and endlessly captivating. In fact, their very independence is part of what continues to attract us to them. We admire their autonomy and their ability to remain unbothered by the constraints of human society. It's a quality that feels timeless, one that connects us to the ancient Egyptians' understanding of cats as powerful, free-willed beings. Looking beyond the domestic sphere, the cat's place in popular culture has only grown. From literature and art to social media, cats have become symbols of both comfort and mystery. The internet, with its abundance of cat memes and viral videos, has created a new dimension of cat worship, this time playful and lighthearted, but still reflecting their timeless appeal. We laugh at their quirks, their funny faces, and their peculiar behavior. Yet we also admire their elegance and mysterious nature. Just as ancient Egyptians saw the cat as an intermediary between the human and divine realms, today's culture still sees cats as creatures that transcend the ordinary. They seem to live in a world of their own, moving with a sense of purpose that feels both magical and sacred. In a sense, we have come full circle. The cats of ancient Egypt were revered as divine guardians, protectors of the home, and symbols of the gods. Today, cats continue to protect our homes in their own way, by offering emotional support, guarding our spaces with their silent presence, and reminding us of a deeper, perhaps even spiritual, connection to the world around us. The ancient reverence for cats, while no longer bound to religious rites and temples, has evolved into something that is just as meaningful. A quiet, unspoken bond between humans and these mysterious creatures. So, as you settle into your own quiet evening, perhaps with a cat curled up beside you, take a moment to appreciate the long, fascinating history that brought them here. The connection between ancient Egypt and cats was built on a deep understanding of the divine and the natural world. Today, even without the spiritual framework that once surrounded them, cats still carry a piece of that ancient power. They remind us that the divine is often not a grand, distant force, but something as close as the creature that shares our homes. As we close this chapter on Egypt's sacred cats, let's remember that the magic of these creatures isn't just confined to the past. It's alive and well today, in the way cats still captivate us with their grace, their independence, and their quiet, powerful presence. Whether as spiritual symbols, as protectors, or as simply our beloved pets, cats have held a special place in human hearts for thousands of years. And perhaps, in their quiet way, they always will. Now, as you prepare to rest, let the image of that cat, whether it's a regal feline from the temples of Egypt or a modern-day companion, linger with you. Let it remind you of the enduring mystery and grace that still define these remarkable creatures. May their presence offer you peace, as they have done for centuries, reminding you that, sometimes, the divine can be found in the simplest of moments.